For identity and language proficiency. Are we groping in the dark? A widely used term in relation to language use and acquisition is identity. Most publications dealing with the issue of identity in bilinguals and multilinguals are little developed and leave the reader somewhat confused at best. Attempting to describe the identity of multilinguals often fails in finding clarity and thus work with a terminological variety, from core personality, personal core, and self-conception to the multifaceted nature of language identity and cosmopolitan personas. On closer examination, however, this confusion of conceptualizations results from an equation of identity with language or with various roles that an individual must fill in daily life. Although Simmel, 1980, provided a very clear concept of social circles, social cries, these are regularly confused with identity, which in extreme cases leads to an L1 and L2 identity separation, and even to identity erasure. Therefore, family-related and professional identities are misleading, as the family and professional roles an individual fills are not well described as identities. Family and work-related commitments are different roles and are usually filled individually only for a certain period of time. It would not be helpful to equate them with identities. While social roles can have an effect on identity, they should not be fully equated with identity. Instead of confusing identity with self-concept and social roles, it is suggested to speak of linguistic profile, which of course affects a speaker's self-concept whether one speaks an L1 or additional L2. The concession identity is unquestionably a complex and multifaceted subject. To conclude, the topic is unsatisfying. The authors note that although their study participants spoke at length about identity-related issues, no consistent picture emerged from their collected accounts. This is hardly surprising, since identity, as used by laypersons, is rarely a well-defined concept, which is even among linguists almost never the case. Therefore, asking study participants about their self-assessment is hardly suitable for reaching a better understanding of the concept of identity, and the results are not comparable. Especially the described forms where language and identity are equated, for example identity erasure, is questionable, because this would mean that the identity of a person would only be defined linguistically, which is certainly not the case. Often, identity is equalized with language, e.g., Qua, who takes multilingual newspaper headlines in Taiwan as evidence that the inhabitants of Taiwan are described to have multiple identities. Though it might be the case that discursive change reflects an upcoming new Taiwan identity, Qua 2009, this will be not multiple identities. However, definitions of identity based on language alone lead to further terminological confusion without better describing the respective phenomena themselves, and are not helpful either. In recent years, there has been a trend to use multiple, fluid, or hybrid to describe the concept of identity. Although many people have developed a tendency not to be satisfied with only one identity, the phenomenon of multiple personalities, which used to be considered a psychopathological issue, is now widespread and treated as normal. But the separation of L1 and L2 identity in the sense of multiple identities that a multilingual individual possesses is misleading. The assumption of a multiple linguistic identity is quite common in applied linguistics, but on closer examination it neither makes sense nor leads to more clarity than the statement, multiple linguistic competence. One cannot agree with the idea that an individual has multiple identities due to the fact that he or she is able to use two or more languages actively and passively. A more promising approach would be to look at the concept of identity in less detail, i.e., without interpreting every social role and every ability and competence of individuals as their own identity. Equally misleading is the proposal of partial, linguistic identities regularly used in linguistic publications, since this notion suggests that the individual can be broken down into separate parts that have nothing to do with each other. This is along the lines of what psychology understands by dissociative identity disorder, DIS. A severe identity disorder is characterized by almost no coherent self-image or sense of identity. However, bilinguals/multilinguals are not ending up with linguistic schizophrenia. There is evidence that adding L2 or even L3 and L4 does not lead to a split personality. When bilinguals speak of themselves as having definitely two different ways of being me, speakers are most likely referring to their perception of themselves under certain conditions or in different social contexts, and not to their identity as a whole. Rather, multiple and split identities, as well as identity loss, will generally be unique to individuals who would also be diagnosed with a severe identity disorder. The approach to the concept of identity in psychology is possible via the detailed considerations of problematic developments, which, with all caution, may allow for reversals for definitional issues in applied linguistics as well. Demon et al., 2011, 281. Name a number of distinguishing features between expressions of identity ranging from mature identity to identity confusion, crisis, conflict, diffusion, and identity fragmentation. A concept of identity understood in this way, as it is used in psychology, makes it clear that it cannot be assumed that all people have the same well-developed identity or an identity that is fully developed at one point in time. In the case of an excellent acquisition of an L2 in adulthood, to speak of identity erasure, nevertheless seems inappropriate, since an identity defined in this way is based on several sources than just the languages an individual is proficient in. If nevertheless, in connection with the move to the L2 living environment, a problem such as the one described above should arise, then this certainly cannot be blamed on the native-like mastered L2 alone. In sum, the concept of social circles proposed by Sim-Mel and the classification of the individual into different role contexts is instead helpful to reach a clearer picture in the question of identity. For linguistics, it would be purposeful to further analyze the experiences of individuals with their linguistic experiences and to sharpen the view for the respective qualities of social relations and emotional bonds that are made with these languages, i.e., for example, what exactly the L2 speakers feel comfortable with and identify with and what they feel repelled by and consequently try to distinguish themselves from. Clarity is further achieved when identity is defined as stable over time. Self-concept, on the other hand, refers to an individual's self-perceived involvement and feelings in a particular situation, as probably described by the study participants in Dornii and Mentzelopoulos' 2023 research. The social roles, younger sister, teacher, student, that an individual fills for a given period of time can affect the self-concept and even the identity of the same. The same applies to the languages an individual uses or finds himself exposed to, especially if an emotional attachment to one of these languages has been developed, e.g., through significant experiences with the same.